Hi, welcome to this episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm joined from California by Carla Manly, Dr. Manly, who's very kindly jumped in. I think it's early morning for you. It's early evening for us. Very kindly jumped in after me having blown it last week when I gave her the wrong time, and she's sort of very kindly come back. So thank you, Carla, for sort of ignoring my inability to deal with transatlantic time differences and joining us. How are you this morning?
I am wonderful. It's raining here. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because you're up by San Francisco, aren't you?
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is, and the thing I liked about San Francisco, well, because I love California, I was saying to you, I love, and so from but it's huge it's a huge country, people,
Mhm.
and so from San Diego, which is, I think you're connected with San Diego from school, so San
Yes.
Diego is almost Mexico, or is Mexico,
Yes.
desert and warm, and then all the way to San Francisco could be London in terms of the climate. It's a very temperate and wet, and and then you've got all that in between in California. And then this is one of the most extraordinary things about California is you can literally in the morning go skiing and then in the afternoon go surfing. I don't think there's anywhere else on the planet where you can do that. I mean, it is an extraordinary, huge, diverse sort of state that you live in.
It is. It's gorgeous. You can go, north of us to extraordinary coldness, beaches, and, very gorgeous cliffs that are very rugged, and then
Yeah.
move down and get a little warmer and warmer as you go to Monterey and Big Sur, and then down and down. And you're right, down to San Diego, and then a skip over into, and we bypassed LA. So,
Yeah.
skip into Mexico.
Well, it's okay to bypass LA.
It is okay to bypass LA.
That's fine. We'll bypass LA. In fact, the only time I've been to Mexico is when I went to San Diego, and I drove across the border just because I wanted to say I'd been to Mexico. And I literally, in the morning, I went across, and you will know this. When you go from the US side, there's no control. You just drive through. And then when you come back from Mexico, there's huge queues that take 2.5 hours. Um, and the border guy stopped me and he said, "Oh, you went to Mexico?" I went, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He said, "How long were you there?" I said, "Go an hour." He said, "You went for an hour?" And he was obviously thinking, this is a weirdo drug dealer. So he said, "Did you buy anything?" I said, "Yeah, I bought some shampoo," which is the
You bought
truth.
shampoo just to buy something in Mexico. Well,
That was what I did. But because I was a dumb English tourist, I didn't think that looked suspicious. So there you go. I think my accent got me through that one. Sort of this, he just went, "Oh, dumb English tourist. Wave him through. That's
go
fine."
ahead through. Didn't even check your trunk.
So, but looking back on it, I think it was quite a bizarre thing. And so, were you born in California? Is it your home state, or?
I was born in Pennsylvania.
Okay,
I
that's
was
the other
in
side of the country.
the other side of the country and grew up with lovely snow and very distinct four seasons.
Yeah,
And my dad, when I was about 11, he said, "We're moving to California. There are no bugs in California," he said.
no
And
bugs.
I
He lied
always
through his
he,
teeth.
he lied because I would get eaten up by mosquitoes in the summer. And lo and behold, there are definitely mosquitoes in California. And I remember when we first crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, I felt very confused because I thought it was going to be gold. It's one of my first
Yeah,
memories of California.
yeah,
I
yeah,
thought, and I kept asking, but why is it orange? Why is it like a burnt orange color?
yeah.
Not understanding that it was never gold and would never be gold.
And where's the gate? They said there was a
Where's the
gate.
gate?
Thank goodness. So yes, I remember. What did you, so can you remember what it was like going to California as a kid? Sort of, was it a
I
big adventure?
remember
Was it frightening, or a bit of both, maybe?
Well, in my family, you didn't. I'm the ninth child in a family of 10 kids, and I was raised Catholic, so you didn't say much that was contrary. You didn't have much space to speak your mind. So
Yeah.
when I was told we were going to be, loaded up and moved cross country, I just said, okay. And
Yeah.
I don't recall even having an opportunity to say goodbye to friends because I think it probably happened during the summer.
Right.
And we just moved, and my parents, very hard workers, both children of immigrants, and worked
Yeah.
very hard. So they came out to California, switched, their business from what they were doing in Pennsylvania to California, left all my aunts and uncles and amazing cousins, and then there we were. What I do remember is it was lovely because I
Hmm.
had a Pennsylvanian accent, which I didn't know Pennsylvanians had accents.
Yeah.
So my
Right.
sister and I, who were both, I was in just starting eighth grade, and she was starting ninth grade, and we were all of the sudden these very popular girls because people liked our accent, and we were new and we were different and we were from Pennsylvania, which who knew that that would be a thing.
Yeah.
So it was lovely. In many ways, it felt like a fresh start.
Right. Right.
And everything was different. I saw fences, between homes for the first time in my
Hmm.
life. And we grew up with lots of acreage around us because the
Yeah.
price
Yes.
difference, of course, is very different. Pennsylvania was very inexpensive. California, even at the time, was considerably more expensive. And we moved to a house on a golf course and had come from a home that we lived on acres because many people in Pennsylvania had acreage.
Yeah.
And I remember looking out the backyard and saying, well, the house is small, but at least we have a big backyard.
Mm.
And my mom came up, she said, that's not a backyard, honey, that's the golf course. That's not your yard. So I remember feeling a little bit confused by
Okay.
how cramped things were in California. But
And
it was,
California's different culturally as well from Pennsylvania. I always think of Pennsylvania as quite rural, quite conservative in attitude, not in a negative way, just in that sort of sense of a rural, closed type community. Whereas California is very, very different and is much more mixed.
it's very different. And in many ways, and I think that, even the size of the house and the fence issue is
Oh,
very symbolic
yeah.
of how there was more space in Pennsylvania
Yeah.
in a physical sense, but at least the Catholic nature of our household and things was a bit more traditional, a
Okay.
bit more staid. I had never run into, I grew up with Italian food and some Russian food because my parents are Italian and Russian, and come out to California and even the food was different. I had never
Yes.
seen tortillas and
Yeah, quite.
yogurt and all of these different things. So much more diversity and a much freer way of being then that I think it's more equalized now, but then it was quite different.
Yeah. Oh, did you enjoy that as a kid? Did you enjoy that diversity and the difference and the choice?
I don't think I knew enough to know
Right.
that I think I was a little bit confused, probably more than anything. And being a teenager, when, faced with change, I clung to that which I knew best, which was my older sister. And
Okay, right.
I
Fair enough.
adored her and followed in her footsteps and wanted to, and she seemed at ease and happy. And so I think I just followed suit that if
Right.
Nin thinks everything's fine, then it must be fine.
Yeah. I come from a Catholic clan as well, so we
Mm.
all sort of supported each other, and it's that very close-knit sort of community family sort of thing that you're part of. So I understand that. It sounds like it was quite good fun as well, sort of quite adventurous. And you went to school. How did you find school?
School, junior high was lovely, lots of experimenting. Um, High school was a little bit more challenging, I think,
Mhm.
socially, because my dad kept a very firm grip on us.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get to experiment safely as much as I wish I had.
Yeah.
We were kept in a cocoon, and sometimes I fought that cocoon and it didn't
Oh,
turn out very well.
yeah.
I
Right.
had a few negative experiences that marked me in some ways, I tend to be a very forgiving person and not, live in the past. But there were things like, goodness, I remember I had never been bullied, but in my junior year of high school, a group of Hispanic people that I didn't know decided to beat me up on the last day of school, which was terrifying.
Yeah,
And all I
absolutely.
had to defend myself were the shoes on my feet, and I took them off and I was using them. And fortunately, the principal or somebody was called because the school was almost vacant at that time. I was waiting for my lift home.
Mm,
And so things like that, I don't have, and, I think teenage times for some people are really lovely overall, and I
mhm,
don't think they were very lovely overall
mm.
for me. So when I look back at times in my life and think, some people want to go back and relive their high school years and their junior high years, and they're, no, thank you, I'll pass. I'll
Right,
I'll
okay.
fast forward into adulthood where I have a little bit more or a lot more agency.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get, I've sort of that thing of the Catholic girl and the father is a bit overbearing is a familiar story, I think. But you got away from that, I guess, by you carried on with the education and went into university. Was that the next step for you?
I did. I went to UC Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
and it was so wonderful because my parents were very hard workers and taught us to be very hard workers, and I really embraced that. Yet when it came to looking at, they were fond of two things and worked very hard to make sure we all got good educations and that we
Mhm.
were able to travel. So they worked very hard for their money, but they weren't extravagant with it, except for education and
Okay.
travel. They believed in those two things.
Yeah.
And so I could have gone almost anywhere I wanted, but what I chose to do, and I look at it and I laugh now, I went to where my sister went, the one who was
Okay,
just
right.
above me.
Yeah.
She had gone to UCSB, and I thought, well, if that's where she is, and I could have gone anywhere, but I went where she was, and I don't regret that decision. And she got into some trouble at that school, so I was pulled out, and she was pulled out and sent to a
Mhm.
private Catholic school in San Diego.
Yeah.
It's University of San Diego, and she chose to run away, and I stayed. I was the good girl in that situation. So she eventually found her way, back, um, and she passed away a couple years ago unexpectedly. So
Oh, I'm sorry to
um
hear that.
yeah, it's a I was very close to her, but back at school at University of San Diego, I studied teaching
Yeah.
because I had thought perhaps I would be a teacher. My family was very fond of me becoming an attorney. So I
Mhm.
actually applied to law school instead of going into teaching, and was in my first year of law school in San Francisco at
Mhm.
Hastings and UC Hastings, UCSF. And it wasn't I was shy of a year where I really decided, in fact, my body decided for me that I wasn't going to pursue law school. So I left, much to my family's dismay and disappointment, and ultimately enrolled in a counseling psychology. Counseling psychology has always been my love. It's what I knew that from um, very early in life, but my family thought that I was
That
too
sounds like a
smart.
very brave decision on your part, Carla.
Hmm.
I hear what you're saying that maybe your body was making a decision. You didn't have much choice, but nevertheless, I guess you knew that your parents at least would be quite shocked by a decision of that nature. It's interesting. I'm just thinking about that sort of immigrant dynamic. My
Hmm.
parents are very hardworking because they were immigrants and they wanted to fit in and they wanted to give us a better life. But they also, it was that strange thing whereby they sort of ossified or they froze the cultures that they came from. So they come from Ireland, both my parents are both dead. Um,
Mm.
but in some sense, the Irishness that they represented stopped existing a long time before. But because they weren't there, they just maintain this sort of strange Irish, old age Irish Catholicism. Like if you go to Dublin now, I remember Dublin as a child, for example, um, and it was a grim place. Dublin was poor and grim and lots
Was
of
it?
it really was. It was a grim place, nothing pleasant about it. Whereas you go to Dublin now, it's extraordinary.
It's
It's an
beautiful.
amazing place. Absolutely, it's
Hmm.
transformed. But it's my parents came from the grim Dublin, and
Hmm.
they didn't change in the way that Ireland has changed. Now, Irish culture has changed hugely, but it is that thing about people that live in the diaspora. They don't change with the home country. They somehow they hold on to that sort of a strange version of the home country that doesn't allow flexibility, in my experience. And often us first generationers, your first generation American, I was first generation British, we have some complications around, well, which culture am I part of? You know, and how do was that an issue for you? Was that sort of something you thought about?
Well, I think it's interesting because neither of my parents spoke their parents' native language in the home. So my mom didn't speak Russian, my dad didn't speak Italian. And I think they were trying so hard to it's one of the things I love about being a psychologist is you see how important it is for people to feel safe and secure.
Yeah.
And that when
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
in that survival mode of
yeah,
being safe and secure, there's not a lot of room in many situations for change, for personal
yeah,
growth,
yeah,
because you're doing everything you can. And there was a time I probably resented my mom and my dad because they could be very harsh human beings in their own way. Yet when I put myself in their shoes and look at my mom, for example, I later learned in life she had only wanted one child. Yet Catholics weren't allowed to use birth control.
yes,
And
quite,
here, could
absolutely,
you
yeah, yeah,
imagine carrying at least 10, I don't know how many miscarriages she might have had,
yeah,
10 children, having your body taken over by some being 10 different times and
mm,
raising them and all of that. So I think for me, I've very much embraced being an American. I love my country. It has
yeah,
so many flaws, but I'm so grateful to be free and to have the right to do what I want to do and be who I want to be. And that is one thing that my dad did many things well, but one of the things he did extraordinarily well, and I can still remember him telling me this, he said, I never want you to need to rely on a man
yeah,
I want you to be able to make your own way in life. And I don't know why, but out of all of my siblings, I was the one he made be his secretary starting at 15 years old.
right,
And
right,
I ended up working in their business
mhm,
after. I left law school and after I got my master's degree because it just worked for me and I didn't like it, but it worked for that time in my life. And so I see that so much of their indoctrination, their way of being as children of immigrants, and was their strength, their tenacity, their
okay.
fortitude to deal with things that many people, I think, would be overwhelmed by.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I get it. I mean, I think it is a real. It's there's several really important insights that I'm hearing there. One is about the nature of survival, and when people are in survival, they will do what they need to do to survive. And even if they don't need to survive, if they feel like they have to, and that need to work with people so they can move out of survival mode into more safety is crucial in life, I think, full stop in life. And often I think migrants don't have that chance. Certainly the first generation don't really have that chance to feel sort of safe, contained, held, and are striving very hard to sort of try and create some safety for themselves and for their kids. So yeah, I really get that. And also being able to contextualize your own parents, I think, is a real gift.
Absolutely. And when you look and think I had the gift of going back to my dad's, family of origin and meeting my family in Calabria in southern Italy
Okay.
and seeing the beauty with him of where his family came from,
Sure.
seeing the beauty of the family connectedness, and seeing some of him in those people, but also realizing that he was and wanted to be an American through and through. He
Okay.
saw himself and wanted to be, and by necessity was. He grew up in a very poor family where he picked up coal from the coal tracks at,
Sure.
six
Yeah,
years of
yeah, yeah,
age.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think when I'm able to look back, and again, for as hard and overbearing and inflexible as he could be, it was before the days where we knew. We talked about patriarchy and toxic
Yes.
masculinity,
Yes.
and women's empowerment was definitely a thing when I was growing up. But it wasn't so much a thing if you were Catholic, and
Yeah.
certainly not in,
Yeah,
so
yeah. Yeah,
it's,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, absolutely.
And so I look now, and I look at my mom and how much she must have really struggled in life to be a good wife. And
Mm.
she and my dad worked hand in hand. It's funny, there's a story that my mom would tell where she says, when your dad asked me to marry him, he said, "Marry me and you'll never work a day in your life." And she worked every day of her life.
Yeah,
She worked
yeah,
tirelessly,
yeah, yeah.
not just with him in the office, but as a mom, as a homemaker, as a cook, as, I mean, we were put to work cleaning and doing all sorts of things because that's how we were raised. And so again, I look back and I appreciate both of them, because there truly is almost nothing I can't do.
Yeah.
I'm educated well enough. I can sew, I can cook, I can clean, I can do certain carpentry things. So I'm fairly fearless in
Mm.
many ways.
And there's also there's something interesting, I think, as well about being part of a large family, and it's sort of it's kill or cure, I think, in my experience. Either you learn to find your voice, or you just get silenced. But it sounds like you found your voice within your family.
Well, Noel, I would love to say that I found it early on, and it
Hmm.
was only through a very negative situation that actually tore my nuclear family apart,
Right.
that I found my voice, and
Okay.
I learned what it was firsthand to have courage, to stand in your truth, to know your truth, and being able to stand in it at all costs. And I think it's one of the reasons that I'm, you know, a good psychologist. It's one of the
Okay.
reasons I'm a good author,
Yeah.
because I think that we always do our best when we've been through something, rather than just having the book knowledge. I'm not
Mhm.
saying book knowledge isn't good. Big book knowledge is fabulous. It's fantastic. But sometimes it's not enough. It's like the
Mhm.
doctor, right? In the hospital.
Mhm.
She, they can have all the book knowledge in the world, but you want them having experience in that operating room with that
Yeah.
particular type of surgery.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so much of what I work with, I've been on the other side of it.
Okay.
And I've come through that other side. And I think it's one of the reasons all four of my books and my podcast, I'm told I come across very authentically.
Okay.
And I think it's because I have worked hard to embrace who I am,
Okay.
to see my strengths, to see my weaknesses, and to keep evolving.
Hmm.
Somewhat shamelessly. I try to be shameless about it. I try to be have so much
Yeah,
courage about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like from a relatively early age. So when you made the decision to leave the career in law and then move more towards psychological therapies, that somehow you knew that that was your vocation, your goal. Is that right? You were sort of clear about that. Where did that come from, do you think, Carla?
I think there's this terrific book. I believe it's with James Hillman, and he talks about how we all have an acorn when we're born, this knowing of what we want to be. And he uses an example of this one kid who always hid behind his mother's skirts, and he ended up becoming a matador.
Yeah.
right? And for me, that knowing was early on in life. I remember, not that she was a good psychotherapist, but I remember liking Lucy in the
Yeah.
Charlie Brown comic strip, not her, but the idea of having this little therapy booth. I loved it. That,
Yeah.
psychotherapy 5 cents. And something in me knew back then and I also loved to write, that's what I wanted to be. But for better or worse, I tested quite high on IQ tests as a child.
Sure.
So I was told I was too smart to be a teacher or too smart to be just a psychologist. And so I would be better off at law because I
Okay.
have, in many ways, a good business mind.
Yeah.
But what it ultimately was that I could make money for other people, yes, because I'm so industrious and hardworking, but being in that environment sucks the soul out of me. And where I am happiest is
Sure.
doing soul work. That's
Yes.
just my happy place.
Yeah.
And so when I left law school and I got my master's, my dad was so disappointed. He didn't even go to my graduation.
No.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
neither of them went to, of course, my mom was quite ill at the time, but she didn't go to my doctoral graduate when I got my doctorate. She couldn't because of her health, but my dad didn't go. It was just not important, certainly to my dad. By that time, bless her heart, it was very important to my mom.
Yeah.
Very important that I follow my dreams. And so much of my journey, I ultimately, I owe to both of them, to my hard work, to those in my life who supported me and really cared. But I know that I finally had the courage to move forward and find
Mm.
my path. And I lost a lot along the way. I lost a
Yeah.
marriage. I lost many things, but do I regret any of them? Absolutely not.
Okay.
And in fact, my first book, Joy from Fear, when I started my doctoral program and I was researching schools to go to earn my doctorate. And when I found the one I ultimately attended, my soul said, that's where you belong. I
Hmm.
had brochures, flyers everywhere, cost sheets, everything. And that my soul just said, that's where you belong. And indeed, the
Interesting.
first,
Yeah, it's interesting. There's
yes.
new research emerging. I mean, it's called intuition as opposed to soul, but the role of that sort of instinctual knowledge
Mm,
is becoming more and more important, I think, in the sort of literature and the research about sort of trusting that and following those guidelines that we all have and stepping into. Did you, because of that, is that what informed your interest in the idea of authentic growth and authentic communication, because you had to, I guess, plow your own furrow at that point and really trust your sort of beliefs and your systems, who you were,
yes.
because
Yes. That education reformatted my psyche.
yes, I can
When I
see.
was,
Absolutely, yes,
yes,
without a doubt. Yeah.
when I was down there on the campus, it's the first time I met my family. My
Yeah.
soul family. I didn't
Yeah,
even know
yeah,
what a soul family was. We
yeah,
didn't talk about such things as Catholics. There were no
yeah.
soul family. You had and I found people where I thought, I don't feel alone anymore. I found
Right.
people who
Okay.
think like me,
Fantastic.
who,
Amazing. Yeah.
yes, it was, and it wasn't perfect. It was so much work. I was still working full time. And one of the reasons I chose the school is I could go down once per month for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday intensive. And then you come back, you work full time,
Sure.
and you're doing all your coursework and the reading at nights. And then on the weekends, and so much heavy research and papers to write and reading. And I was like a duck in water. I was just one of the seniors when we went down for our first classes. I'd run into a senior and they were speaking and they said, you're going to not read almost any of the books, so don't feel badly about it. You simply won't have the time. And I laughed. And because I did, I read everything as
You
if it
do. Right.
was,
Right.
if it was food. And it was the most wonderful experience that taught me so much about who I am, what my path is in life. I do have to say there were just the people who supported me through it. I mean, they were long weekends. It was so much work. And again, working full time, but it is one of the reasons I really believe that when we, you know how people say the universe will handle it. You know, follow your dreams, the universe will handle it. You can manifest it. Yes, yes, and you must be willing to do the work. You must
Yeah.
be willing to look and then do the work. So yes, the universe opened the door for me. I had to be willing to walk through it, to lose a marriage where my husband said, you know, you have enough education. I'm not behind you on this, even though I had supported him in so many endeavors. And this was my first endeavor
Mhm.
as a woman. And I had to be willing to lose that and go through all of that. And I just can't say enough wonderful things about when you are willing to walk through, call it fire, call it rain, call it whatever you want, all the uncertainty. I do believe that's when, whether you want to say it's the divine, God, manifesting, I do believe that when you're willing to put in the work and stay open to what is best for you, that definitely the universe paves the way, it helps out.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that lots. I think I've seen a lot of evidence of that. I've seen also things can go disastrously wrong for people as well. So I think there's some part of that story which I'm really intrigued by is you finding this soul family. And I think I can intuit what you mean by soul family, but I'm fascinated by us as social animals and how we discover ourselves in relationship to other people. And so it's almost like you're saying a narrative, and tell me if I'm overinterpreting here, but there was a narrative from your family of origin that there were a set of expectations that were placed upon you because of the parents and their parents, etc. And somehow you needed to break with that. And then you got married into that set of expectations. Somehow you needed to break with that. But the conduit, the movement towards that was the knowledge, but also finding a fertile sort of set of people that could reflect back to you that brilliance and that beauty that you were manifesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was, I think, you know, I'm still friends with some of my colleagues
Yeah,
today, and it's because, and I believe this, that sometimes we don't get everything we need in the family of origin. And that's why we have friends and a soul family. So for me, a soul family, going back to what you spoke about intuition, I think our intuition, that gut instinct, when coupled with some of our wisdom, not necessarily intelligence, but with our wisdom, can guide us into that knowing of this feels right. This is good. Oh, this
yeah,
doesn't feel right. And we're taught so often in many religions, in many walks of life, that you don't want to touch trust that instinct, that
yeah,
you just want to be good, you want to be quiet, you want to do what is right, who, you know, whoever's calling the shots there,
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
their
yeah,
right
yeah,
is. And this was an experience where I was reading works, whether it was Carl Jung, James Hillman,
yeah,
all of these wonderful people who they were my family as well. They thought, and I could see myself in the works of Carl Jung because they resonated with me.
sure.
And so many of my classmates, again, they were drawn there because they walked the same path. Their drum, you know, their tunes were similar to mine. And so, again, as challenging as it was, there were people there who were like-minded, like-souled. And that gave me truly my first experience with feeling like I was in the right nest.
Yeah. And there's something also about, I think, the written word, which is quite magical. If we think about the history of literature, sort of originally it was the Latin Bible, and there would be these guys who would copy them exactly, the words in candlelight. And then somebody invented the printing press, and the Bible got translated into indigenous language and universal. sort of literacy happened. And that was a revolution in human psychology when that happened.
Yes.
And I think that magic still exists in literature, in textbooks, and that ability to magically and creatively connect with Carl Jung, even though he's not alive, but through what he wrote, is a really wonderful human thing that we can do. And if we can tap into that, I think the sky's the limit, to be honest. If we can tap into that sort of literate, creative, expansive mind that's available through these great works, I think.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of Jung's concept of the collective unconscious.
Hmm.
And this was so new to me, talk of collective unconscious and the archetypes. And I was saying, what? And I'm very curious. And so I was learning a new language that, again, I can only explain it as it was. It felt like food for my soul.
Yeah.
And when I wrote my first book, it was actually because of my life, my
Hmm.
journey. And when I was called to do, it was time for me to do my dissertation, because of course you must do your dissertation in order to graduate.
Yeah.
And people were terrified, and what should they do? And should it be qualitative or quantitative? And I came across the topic of researching fear,
Yes. Yes.
because I wanted to
Wonderful.
understand what fear had held me back for
Yeah.
decades of my
Yeah.
life from pursuing, and could I find a way to help other people notice? I would have never thought it was fear, Noel, that had held me back. I
Hmm.
thought I was strong and tough and resourceful. And when I got to the bottom of it, I realized it was fear. It was fear of not being loved by my family, of
Yes.
having
I get
God
that. That
punish
makes
me.
absolute sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So I decided not to do qualitative or quantitative. I decided to do both. I went full bore and I created two assessment tools, one qualitative, one quantitative, and I
Mhm.
decided to research fear. And then I started writing my dissertation, and you get to choose one outside reader.
Okay.
So you have to choose two from the faculty, but you
Yeah.
can choose one outside. And me being me, I thought, who in the whole world would I choose to be my external reader? And I thought, I think either Oprah would get this, or yes, Oprah or Thomas More, who wrote Care of the Soul. Those were the only
Yeah.
two possibilities in my
Yeah.
mind.
Did you manage to
And
get Oprah? That would be astonishing if you did.
no, she didn't write back. I was so surprised.
All right.
Me being,
I'm gonna call her after this and tell her off.
please, please do. And I'm such a half, gl-
Correct.
glass 3/4 full kind of
I
person that I
love
was
that.
truly
I love the fact that
surprised.
you did write to her. I bet you did. How
I did.
wonderful. How
And I'm
wonderful.
hope springs eternal. And I also wrote to a
Well,
New York
I hear
Times.
she does watch my podcast, so you never know. She might get you on
We never know.
and
And so my runner up was Thomas More.
yeah,
Not that he's second best to anyone. And he wrote Care of the Soul.
yeah,
And his was one of the books that changed my life, because as I
sure.
read his work, I thought, oh my God, I love this man. I love him. I
Yeah.
love what he's writing. It was similar to my feelings for Carl Jung. And he gets me, and he talked in ways that made sense to me. And so I wrote to him, and I said, would you be my, and he said, yes.
Oh, how wonderful. What a generous
And
guy.
oh, generous, magical. And I've met him and I've spent time with him, and
Yeah,
he and his wonderful wife live, on the East Coast, and I feel a very strong connection to him.
great.
But that is the power of, in my mind, of manifesting, of doing that work. And so I
Yeah.
wrote the dissertation. When he read it, he said, Carla Marie, you need to make this into a book.
Ah, okay,
This is
wonderful.
magical.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so it took me 8 years to translate it from that academic research heavy thing where you're trying to prove your point and prove all of these things into something that was beautiful and digestible and helpful. And that became my first book, and it's
Great.
called Joy from Fear.
Wonderful.
And yes, and and Thomas More's actually the review on the front cover, and I just can't thank him enough because he's such a light in my life and in many people's lives because of the magic
Yeah.
of his message, of his soul. And so I've carried on my work in that way, but always everything that I write in my books comes from a place of deep knowing,
Okay.
knowing that comes from me, but I know it's from also beyond me.
But
And
let's move
yes,
on then to the next book. What was that called? The next book that you
my
wrote, and where did
next
that
book,
come from? Yeah.
my next book, Aging Joyfully, came from, I was working with
I
a
just want to
300,
stop and hear you say that again because we don't say that enough. Aging joyfully.
aging joyfully, aging joyfully, aging joyfully.
It's so like the cult of youth that exists at the moment. Not that I've got anything about young people, except I think youth is wasted on the young, as the saying goes. Do you know that saying?
Absolutely. And that's why I said earlier I wouldn't go back because I honestly have to say I was a bit stupid.
I
I
was
was
very stupid.
yes,
Dumb.
yes, I was so naive, and I never want to lose my naivete and my trust, my willingness to trust people. But I have to say I was pretty blind, and
Okay, yeah.
I was pretty blind.
That's
And
the overprotective parent, though, isn't it? The controlling overprotective parent. It sort of doesn't set you
yes.
up. Somebody was telling me a really interesting story about two different styles of parenting that they had and their friend had. And in one, dad drove them to school every day. And then when they became an adult, they didn't know how to use public transport. They didn't know how to get themselves from A to B because dad wasn't there to drive them. The other one, dad said, took them to the bus stop and said, get on the bus, give me a call if there's a problem. And
Yes.
do you know what I
And
mean?
I
I mean, it's like it's that type of, I understand why we want to protect children, but we can be overprotective of them. And, I'm not quite of the school that says you have to throw a kid off a cliff and see if they bounce. I think that might be a little bit extreme, but somewhere in between, we have to sort of have that mixture, don't we, of allowing life to happen, but in a safe way.
and I love how you're saying that, allowing life to happen in a safe way, because at least in my family, not only were we protected from some normal healthy experiences, but we weren't permitted to talk. I wasn't permitted to talk. And
Yeah,
so some
yeah,
very horrible things happened to me. I mean, very horrible things that I would never want to happen to anyone.
yeah,
But I wasn't permitted to talk about it.
yeah,
I wasn't permitted to heal from it. I wasn't permitted because it, the thing in my family was we don't talk about it. Whatever happens stays in the
yeah,
family. You don't
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about it.
yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in, again, whatever I write about, it comes from a place of wanting people to be able to talk. Let's talk. There is nothing in life that we shouldn't be able to talk about,
And I
that we
think,
shouldn't. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
sorry to interrupt, but I wonder what you think about this. I think if you're in any sort of intimate relationship, whether it's family or marriage or therapy or whatever it is, if you're silenced, if you're told you can't talk about stuff, that should be a red flag that there's a really significant problem going on. And I don't mean by that somebody might not lack the emotional intelligence. Like, there's a lot of older guys who lack the education and understanding to name their feelings and communicate them, but they don't actively try and stop you. They just don't know how to do it. And if you give them the opportunity to learn, they learn and they try their best, and that's what happens, right? But in systems that are actively shutting you down, that people should, I think, see that as a red flag. I don't know what your sort of views on that are.
My views are that anytime we're shut down, and Navalny is coming to mind right now because I'm grieving him terribly,
Sure.
and I am grieving his message terribly. And
Yeah.
that's a perfect example of people being shut down on a massive level.
Yeah.
And so whether we're doing it in a government, or we're doing it in intimate relationships, or we're censoring people in schools, one of the reasons I say I love my country, it's not perfect, but we have the freedom to speak.
Yeah.
And I have the freedom to speak. And unfortunately, I didn't have that freedom in my childhood, but I make up for it now. I
Yeah.
do.
Good.
And I try to always speak with dignity, courage, and respect, but I do. And even things that are painful to me, I will speak about. I will say my truth. Why? Because it's what I have. I
Mm.
have my love, I have my courage, I have my truth. And that's the message in Not Aging Joyfully, but that's my message in my all of my books, but particularly my fourth book that's coming out, Joy of Imperfect Love. It is the truth that none of us are perfect. I will never be
Yes.
perfect. I will
Yeah.
go to my grave learning and evolving. And it is this myth of perfection, of what we should be. It is that part where people in many cultures, including our culture, where men, women aren't taught how to be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
We aren't taught that. We aren't taught how to make relationships work.
That's
And
right.
so
Yeah.
that's what I do in the Joy of Imperfect Love. I walk you through it from A to Z so
Mhm.
that you can see, hey, it's not your fault. You grew up in some sort of system where
Mhm.
either you learned the skills or you didn't learn the skills,
Yeah.
where you have secure attachment or you don't have secure attachment. And if you want to do this work, I've been there. Let me help you do it. Let's walk through it together.
Also, I
And
think,
that's,
yeah, I think the
yes.
world has changed so much.
Hmm.
I'm turning 57 in a couple of weeks' time, and I remember the 70s in school, and the challenges to role boundaries, quite appropriate challenges to role boundaries that began to happen through feminism. And I still remember, for example, a conversation with my father that went something like this. I was peeling some potatoes back in the days when we peeled potatoes rather than just wash them, you know. And I was peeling some potatoes, preparation for cutting them up and boiling them and making some food. And my father said to me, "What are you doing?" I'm peeling some potatoes. I mean, it seemed obvious. Well, it was quite a strange question. He said, "No, why are you doing that?" I said, "Because I'm hungry and I want to eat." He said, "But women do that." And I went, "Dad, no." I
Oh
don't.
my goodness.
I mean, it's literally, I still remember this conversation with him that people were hidebound in these ways of thinking and these sort of role boundaries. And from then to now, the world, my world, is significantly different. And I've had to adapt and grow. Thankfully, I've got the tools and resources to adapt and grow. And I'm profoundly grateful for that. And I've learned that a lot through psychology, but mostly through being interested in and caring about and loving the people around me. And as they have changed, I've wanted to change with them because I want to keep them in my life, and that's how it works. But there is, I think you're right. There's a cohort of people who get afraid of these changes, and they get really worried and anxious about them, and they get really worried that they're going to somehow lose themselves in this process of growth and change. What's your sort of take on that, Carla? What's your experience? Because you've obviously somebody who embraces. I mean, you're cheeky with change. You love it by the looks of it.
I thank you for saying that. That's a compliment, but it's change scares me.
Does it?
Change scares me, but I have learned to lean into it.
Okay.
So that's the difference. It's not for me, I have become not a change junkie, but continue to brace myself to constantly change.
Yeah.
If I don't change, I'll become stuck, and I've been stuck, and I don't want to be stuck anymore. I
Yeah.
never want to know stuckness again. And
Okay.
so I encourage people to, and that's going back to Aging Joyfully. That's what I do in that book. And it's interesting because my publisher, the subtitle is about, optimal relationships and growth for your 50s and beyond. And I wanted it to be 30s and beyond.
Yeah.
Why? Because I work with people in their late 20s who are terrified of getting old, this beast of age. And they even asked me to remove the word crone from the book because we talk about the maid and the mother and the crone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had
Losing
to
appetite.
remove
Great.
crone because it wasn't an appropriate term for the book. And I thought, even in this day and age where we can't see that there is wisdom and beauty in every life stage,
Yeah, of
and
course.
that if we fight aging, as many people are doing, we're missing the fun of it. We're missing
Yeah,
the fun. We're aging. We're aging from the moment we're born. So
yeah, yeah.
why make the first 2 decades the prime decades? Why not see that every decade, as long as we're engaged and having fun and not letting ourselves get stuck, which is fear. Fear is the stuckness. Let's just keep moving.
Yeah.
Let's just keep growing. It doesn't mean I never get disheartened. Of course I do. Like when I reached out to Oprah and never heard back, right? It's like, oh, darn, here I had these high hopes. We just want to pick it up and do it again. Try a
I
little
promise you
harder.
I'll give her a call later and sort that one. One of the things I like though about these sort of archetype and mythic structures is this use of these words that suggest stages in growth, and it's very different to say cognitive behavioral approaches, which are about management of symptoms, and quite appropriately so, and they're really helpful for that. But this idea of having a big picture about life cycles, I think is a really interesting way of thinking about things, and gives meaning and purpose to these changes, and we can then contextualize what's going on. And I think having a context for something does take away some of the fear, to be honest. So I'm trying to think. There's a book. It's something like the king, the prince, or something. It's one of those Jungian archetypal books talking about life stages for men: the prince, the king, the farmer, or something like that.
I don't know the book. It sounds like something I ought to know, but I do believe that when we contextualize the life stages, which is
Yeah,
one of the things that Aging Joyfully I do in all my books, one of the things that I think sets them apart is that it's the same way I do psychotherapy. Sure, I help people who need some CBT work, some EMDR, some
yeah,
Rogerian approaches, all of that, but I'm a Jungian at heart.
yeah,
And one of the things I realized is early in my doctoral program is that we don't change if we don't work it. We can read about it, but if we don't do the work, we don't change. You need to. So every single one of my books contains exercises,
yeah,
whether they're breathing exercises, journaling exercises. And one of the exercises in Aging Joyfully is about looking at your roles in life.
yeah,
That if we look that we're just switching roles, maybe we were the producer, maybe we were the mother, maybe we were the father, but as we age, we now are in a better position to choose our roles, to
yes, yes,
shift
yes,
our
yes,
roles.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And when we
yeah,
look at that, because there's so much of our first decades of life where we're doing what we feel we must do. We're
mm,
building the career, we're getting the education, we're getting the home. And when we look at 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s as the opportunity, pick up whatever role you want.
yeah. No, I
Be the
agree.
volunteer.
Yeah, yeah,
Go get your pilot's license.
yeah, yeah,
Go pick up litter at the beach. Whatever it is, world's your oyster.
yeah,
And I think that that's such an important part of the journey, looking that we can look down at aging or we can look up at it with reverence.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. It's also, I think, we live in a world where traditional cultures would have had containment, containing myths and structures and rituals for transitions from one stage to the next. And so you would have had people who would guide you from one stage of life to the next stage of life, and you would be sort of encultured into, and you would be given sort of they weren't always great, but you would be given some sense in which another bit of your life has started, and you had a specific cultural role within that. The elder, etc. And we do seem to have, we in our culture, those sort of simple, straightforward transitions are not available, and we need to sort of think about our need for that, because I think that's a very much an important thing that we need as human beings. Is that
Yes. And Thomas More informed me a lot about that, about the loss of rituals
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the importance of the rituals. And so I think about it, in the US, we have the ritual of getting your driver's license,
Yeah.
or being of smoking age, or being of
Yes.
drinking
Yes.
age,
Yes.
or voting age,
Yeah.
but they don't come with big celebrations. There is no rite of passage. And the Hispanic culture has, the quinceañera, and in the Jewish culture, they have their rites of passage. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things I really love about certain religions, that they do have these rites of passage
Yeah.
that take you from one bracket to the next,
Yeah.
to give you that sense of transition. And I think that's so important. And I think it's one of the reasons I love the idea of marriage, for example, because you have those rituals that help
Mhm.
the couple say, I'm yours and you're mine. And let's hope
Yeah.
they take it seriously, right? And I'm going to be there for you. I'm
Yeah.
going to support you.
Yeah.
And I do think it's something that many cultures have lost over time, are these important rites of passage that let somebody pass from teen to adulthood,
Yeah.
from the maiden to the mother, from the mother to the crone, and honoring those for men and women alike.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have these rituals, we don't have as much meaning.
Yes. No, I think we lose meaning without ritual.
Yes.
Definitely. So we're sort of running out of time. I want to come to your final book that you're just about to sort of tell us a bit more about the genesis of that, and sort of what led to you writing it and what you're hoping to achieve by giving it to the world.
With the joy of imperfect love, I have come to really honor attachment theory.
Okay.
I'm always learning, always incorporating new concepts. I'm not a one size fits all therapist. I don't
Yeah.
know just one approach. And I've really embraced attachment theory.
Okay.
It's one of the most well-researched areas of psychotherapy,
Mhm.
and the researchers behind it have done phenomenal work. And
Mhm.
it helps me help others realize, again, when you couple that with the idea of neurobiology, it gives us power to reshape ourselves,
Mhm.
to claim who we are, to turn love inward, to work on self-love,
Yeah.
and then to begin to offer that in our relationships. It pulls in the foundations of healthy communication.
Yeah.
Connective communication is what I call it. Um, Emotional intelligence overall. And the theme through it is that, again, we are all imperfect,
Yeah.
but it's in my mind, it is not only our privilege, but our right and our responsibility to do self work.
Yeah.
And as we do our self work, then we evolve, we become better individuals, never perfect. And that's the tagline for my podcast. We don't need to love ourselves perfectly to love others well.
Yeah.
And to keep waking up each day,
Mhm.
not giving up on ourselves or our partners or the people in our lives, but cultivating a sense of who we are, healthier boundaries,
Yeah.
healthier inner narratives is a big part of the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then taking all of these skills into forging the healthy connections that are the foundation. We're so busy achieving externally that we forget, which is why mental health issues are skyrocketing.
Sure.
There's so much attention on the external that we
Mhm.
forget that we have to start from the soul.
Yeah.
We have to start, and yeah, it's a little bit scary once you start diving in there, but it's nothing that your soul doesn't already know. So
Yeah.
it's about turning in, learning what's in there, making friends with your frailties, shoring them up, making friends with your strengths, making them stronger, if you will,
Mm.
and then taking that, and then you become a force for love, not
Mhm.
just in yourself, but in your small little world.
Yeah.
And then that small little world reaches out to every person that you help, whether you're volunteering or you're giving a hug or a smile or you're writing a book or a song or teaching a dance class, whatever it is. I believe all of those little things are what the world needs right now,
Yeah,
more
and
than anything.
without a doubt, we need far more of that. Absolutely. And sort of, it's making me think about some of my early reading around. There was a guy called Winnicott who was a child psychoanalyst in the UK, which you probably have heard of. But his
He's
idea,
mentioned in my book
oh,
because
is
he is
he?
one of the attachment.
Yeah, well, his
Winnicott, Mary's Ainsworth, Bowlby, all of
right,
those.
exactly. Yeah. And that's sort of
Yes,
his idea of, you don't have to be perfect. You just need to be good enough. It's like, that's it. I mean, it's such a great idea, isn't it? Just be good enough.
it's he's quoted in the book for
Yeah.
that for many reasons, but
Yeah.
for that, the idea of being a good enough parent, that was him. And he is probably one of the first people I quote in the book because that
Yeah.
he is one of the key founders
Yeah.
of
I mean,
attachment theory.
yeah, and it's also he was the interesting guy. Unlike a lot of analysts, as you know, a lot of analysts they saw just a small number of people and then made wild claims from having seen 4 or 5 people. It was like he was unusual in that he saw a lot of people because he worked in hospitals in the East End of London, not far from where I live, to be honest.
Ah,
And there's still a mental health centre named after him, not far from where I live.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
he did so much work with children who were abandoned, so to speak,
Well,
in the war. That's where,
he
yes.
he was responsible for a change in policy in UK hospitals because until he came along, it was thought that if a child was ill in hospital, the parents should leave them alone and just let the doctors get on with it. And he turned around and said, no, that's nonsense. You have to, the parents have to stay with the child, which is now why we have wards where there's family rooms and parents are welcomed in, they're encouraged to stay. And that was a psychologist, sort of, and that's connected, I think, to what you're talking about
Absolutely.
the healing of the world comes from that connection. But you don't have to be Superman or Superwoman. You just have
No,
to be kind and loving.
it's the best gift that we have to
Yeah,
give.
I think so.
It's the best gift. And
Yeah.
when you think about Winnicott back there in the 50s, right? And
Yeah.
here, his message, his kindness,
Yeah.
his message, his strength has informed me so that, and so many other people, that
Yeah.
I'm able to pass it on. And so we never know that one act of kindness, of courage, of good intention, if that's all we do each day is just offer a little bit of that, just a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. That's a lot.
We are, it's a lot,
Yeah.
and we never know who's witnessing it, whether it's a child, whether it's a loved one, somebody at work, somebody on the street, whether you're picking up a piece of trash, which I'm fond of doing too much so sometimes. But it's all of those little things that,
Great.
are we a force for good in the world? Or are we a force that's neutral, or are we a force that's working against?
Well, I can confidently say I think you're a force for good, Carla, from having chatted to you for the last hour. We have run out of time, I'm afraid. If
Thank you.
people want to find out more about you and where to get your books, have you got a website that they can contact you
Yes,
on?
it's at drcarlamanly.com.
drcarlamanly.com. Well, look,
Yes.
it's Carl, it's just been an absolute pleasure to
Thank
have you on
you.
the podcast. If you've got other links and things like that, do email them through to me. I'll get James, my techie guy, to make sure that when the show goes out, people have your website and links to where to buy the books, etc. And I hope that one day I'll see you in London. I might see you next time I'm in California. I'll let you know next time I pop over. But
I'd
I
love that.
just wish you all the joy for
Thank
what you're
you.
doing. So you stay there. Goodbye, everybody. So it's another amazing show. I don't know. I enjoy these shows. I hope you do.
I
So
do. I do. It's one of, I didn't talk about it much, but it's one of the reasons I started podcasting for my
Yeah,
publisher 4 years ago,
right.
where they asked me, they didn't have a podcast, and the PR girl said, "Would you start a podcast for us? You have such a lovely voice." I said, "I have no idea how, but I'll figure it out."
Yeah,
And then back in September, I decided to launch my own,
right.
and I just launched it, and it's one of my favorite things in my week. It takes work, of course, but
Yeah.
I love it, and I love connecting with people and hearing their stories. So you get to be
Yeah.
on the other side today.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it is a pleasure to me. Anyway, we have to finish there, so I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
Thank
You
you.
stay there, Carla, and then I'll see you all in the next podcast. I don't know who it's going to be, but we'll see. It'll be somebody nice, I'm sure. So take care, everybody.